Good evening to all. Kalispera se όλους. Thanks for being here in presence and okay, success. What's up? No, è un problema di disattivato, attivato, disattivato. Thank you for being here in presence and online. And about online, I hope you can hear well. For any audio connection problem, you can obviously type on chat. So, welcome to the second meeting of the seminars of the third floor, organized by the postdoc of the Italian Archaeological School at Athens, for which I would like to thank all those who have allowed the organization, the school director Emanuele Papi, the collaborators, and the colleagues present here. But we come to the guest of honor of today's seminar, the Dr. Vittorio Saldutti, whom I've known for some time, and whom I would like to thank for being here with us. Researcher in Greek history at the University of Naples, Federico II, the university where he trained and then obtained a PhD at the University of Bari, Aldo Moro. In this university and at the University of Naples, Orsola Benincasa, he has held several teaching positions over the years. He has collaborated on several projects, including iPad, a digital archaeology project on ancient Irpinia, and he was part of the research group of the University of Tübingen on sculpture and architectural material in Irpinia, present in Irpinia. He spent several periods of study and research abroad, including a period here at the Italian Archaeological School at Athens, to work on the publication of his doctoral dissertation. Among others, the main line of research is oriented to the reconstruction of Athenian political history during the years of the Peloponnesian War. And some of these conclusions were then published in his monograph Cleone, an Athenian political. Cleone, un politico ateniese. And it is precisely within this trend that his speech today is inserted. In his speech, in fact, the Dr. Saldutti will talk to us about the stability of the Athenian law, in particular difficult years for Athens, such as those immediately preceding or internal to the Peloponnesian conflict, a time when decisions to be made were often subject to change. The Dr. Saldutti will try to demonstrate through a careful analysis of literary and epigraphic sources, the level of stability of the laws, and the possible existence of procedures put in place to stem the power of the assembly, so as to make stable, at times unchangeable, the decision taken and safeguard the democratic regime. But we leave the floor. I would leave the floor to the Dr. Saldutti for the question. The question will be at the end of the seminar. And after the question, there will be a small refreshments in the garden for us. Thank you to Vittorio Saldutti and thank you all for presence and participation.
Thank you, Cristina, and thank you to the organizer of the seminars of the third floor. I'm excited to be here. Maybe you can hear my excited voice, since in this room, exactly in this hall, 9 years ago, I was reading the last draft of my first monograph. So the Loro Levi Hall is a special place for me in my career. And now let's start with the paper. As Kenneth J. Dover was working on his outstanding commentary on Thucydides' book 6 and 7, his attention was captured by the rare verb anapsephisein. It appears just once in a historian's text at 6:14. The context is the second assembly held at Athens in regard to the Sicilian expedition. Nicias tried to convince the audience to repeal the previous decision of sending a huge fleet against Syracuse. His final appeal was directed to the president of the rally, the Prytanis of the assembly. He asked him, it's the text in the PowerPoint, so Chairman Prytanis, if you see it as your responsibility to protect the interests of the city and want to show yourself a patriot, I ask you to put this to the vote and invite the Athenians to give their opinions once more. If you are nervous of calling for a second vote to anapsephisae, you should consider that in front of so many witnesses, you cannot be accused of a breach of procedure, or another possible translation is put an end to any of the traditional procedure of the assembly. Tomen euein tus nomus. Jowett, in his old translation of the Thucydides text, has the simple breaking the law, and that you have it on your power to restore the city to health when it has taken a wrong decision. This is the honorable exercise of office to benefit one's country as best one can, or at least be no conscious party to its harm. After Nicias' speech, there was the Alcibiades speech, and the Athenians decided to confirm their previous decisions. Dover was stimulated by this phrase, the phrase that we have read, and in an article published in 1955 in the Journal of Hellenic Studies, tried to answer the question of whether it was possible to put to the vote for the second time an issue on which a decision has already been taken, or turning the question upside down, whether anapsephysis in 5th century Athens was explicitly forbidden by law or could reasonably be regarded as contravening the law. I must emphasize that the word anapsephysis is an invention of Kenneth J. Dover. There's no attestation of the word in the extant Greek literature after in all Greek literature. He replied, Kenneth Dover replied to this question in the affirmative, since he could find other examples in literature. The first extant example came from the Mytilenes episode in the 3rd book of Thucydides. After having suppressed the rebellion on the island of Lesbos, the Athenians decided at the assembly to kill all adult males and enslave women and children. During the following night, they regretted their decision and summoned another assembly to debate once more about the Mytileneans' destiny. The proposal of a milder resolution was to kill only those responsible for the revolt, and there were 1,000, so not a very generous decision, won by a few votes, and the previous vote was withdrawn. Thucydides summarizes the second assembly with 2 opposed speech. By Cleon, the famous demagogue, in favor of the harsher punishment of the rebel town, and by the almost unknown Diodatus, who supported the moderate solution. Delivering his speech, Cleon stated that worst of all for us will be if there is no constancy in our decisions, and if we forget that imperfect laws kept valid give greater strength to a city than good laws unenforced. According to Dover, this limited reference to a possible violation of laws in a large speech fundamentally devoted to arguing against the core of the problem, i.e., how to manage allied revolts, demonstrated that there is no need to believe that anapsephysis was illegal, this is a quote, in 427, and some reason to believe that it was not illegal. With this first conclusion in mind, Dover read the final appeal of Nicias in the Sicilian speech as a call to the president of the assembly to do something unusual, but not illegal per se. In allowing anapsephysis, the Prytanis was not contravening the law, only a consolidated procedure, as it stands in the foregoing translation we have read at the beginning of my speech. And this was the meaning of Juventus Nomus, contravening the law. Since then, the article was published in 1955, I said. This reading of Thucydides' text and of the anapsephizein procedure or anapsephysis procedure has become the conventional one. Reaffirmed by Dover in his commentary on Thucydides, it has been accepted by Werner Kohl, Riccardo Vattuone, Mogens Hermann Hansen, Simon Hornblower in the new Oxford commentary on Thucydides, and P.J. Rhodes, among other scholars. In recent years, only Edward Harris has rejected Dover's interpretation of Nicias' last call. First of all, he dismisses the translation of Juventus Nomus as invalidating an existing practice or procedure, and proposes to translate the phrase more, I think, easily and naturally as violating the laws. If this is the case, that is that Nicias was asking the president of the meeting to break the laws, Harris wonders which laws they were referring to and how the Prytanis could violate them. To the first question, he answers that Nicias' request was illegal because he had not made his proposals first in the council and had not had the Prytanes place the discussion about them on the agenda of the assembly. Harris distinguishes this episode from that of Cleon, since in 427 the Prytanes were responsible for summoning the second assembly, and all evidence suggests that they had correctly organized the agenda of the meeting with an open problema about the fate of the meeting events. Harris then solves the second problem, that is, how it was possible to ask an official to break the laws with so many witnesses, arguing that he had done so under duress and out of concern for public interest, as happened many times before and after the meeting. The most obvious example was the Arginuse trial, when the Prytanes were acquitted from the allegation of having put an illegal motion to the vote, since they were acting under duress and unusual circumstances. Concluding his essays, Harris states that there is no evidence that the Athenians had a custom of not overturning decrees passed in previous meetings of the assembly. Bearing this introduction in mind, in my paper, I'll try to demonstrate against both Dover and Harris that in the second half of the 5th century, the Athenians probably developed an anapsephizein procedure in the context of a growing concern for the safeguard of democratic regime. I'll then conclude by observing what this meant for the stability of democracy in Athens. Altering laws was regarded as dangerous in Greek legislative tradition. Early legislators like Lycurgus and Solon were thought to have gone into voluntary exile to leave their laws unaltered. In 4th century democratic Athens, the most described law as a polis eunomumene, a well-governed city, a model because of its laws prescribing that the proposer of a new law had to have a noose around his neck, and if the law didn't pass, was to be killed on the spot. This ideology led so-called entrenchment clauses, this is another new word, to be added to many decrees in and outside Athens. According to David Lewis, who has invented the word and the meaning of entrenchment clause, an entrenchment clause is a clause inserted within a decree in an attempt to give it greater permanence and to limit any future attempt by those who might object to someone forbidding the demos for doing everything it desired. The last Greek sentence, Deion einai eimetis easei ton demon pratein oan buretai, is a quote from Xenophon and the episode of the Arginuse trial. And we will talk about it later. So far as we know, the most ancient entrenchment clause in Athenian legislation comes from Draca's homicide law. It is once again Demosthenes who quotes the provision, which goes as follows. Whoever, whether a magistrate or a private citizen, is cause of the violation of the statute or will modify it, is to be disenfranchised along with his children and his goods. There is no trace of the clause in the extant fragment of the Stele, which reports the law, was republished in 409-8, but a close comparison of it with Demosthenes' quotations from the law demonstrates his trustworthiness, Demosthenes' trustworthiness in citing this law. The most ancient epigraphic sources reporting entrenchment clauses come from outside Attica. Two laws may be interrelated, which come from Naupactus, include entrenchment clauses in the final provision. The first is the Papadakis bronze found in 1924 in an unknown location somewhere between Aetolia and Locris, and now at the Archaeological Museum in Athens. The inscription is dated to around or before 500 and gives two laws. The first, which is of interest to us, concerns the distribution, heritage, and use of land in a plain that is probably in the Cora of Locrian colony of Naupactus. The law is sealed with a provision saying that anyone who introduces a motion for the division of land or who votes for such a motion in the Council of Elders, in the polis, or in the elected council, or who incites a civil strife for the division of land, that person shall be cursed, his property shall be confiscated, and his house shall be demolished, according to the law on homicide, unless in the case of war, 101 citizens from the aristocracy or the majority decide to bring as new colonists 200 men of military age and ability. The other inscription related to previous one is a law about the colony of Naupactus that was voted for prior to the departure of the Messenian colonists in 460. The inscription, also written on a bronze plaque, was found in Galaxidi in 1848 and is kept at the British Museum. It establishes the mutual relations between the inhabitants of Naupactus and the Eupocnamidian Locrians, founder of the colony. At the end of the law, before the final oath, the law prescribes that, is in the PowerPoint, anyone who attempts by any means or method to abolish these resolutions will be deprived of his civic rights and his property will be confiscated, unless it was agreed between the two parties, the assembly of 1,000 in Opus and the assembly of the colonists in Naupactus. The two clauses are very similar and are both devoted to making it impossible not only to change the laws, but even to discuss changing them, unless there is a preceding arrangement made by appointing political organs with a quorum in the case of the Papadakis bronze. The fine for the proposer of any change is atimia and confiscation of all personal and family property. And in the case of the first law, the reference for the fine is the homicide law. To sum up, from the laws, it emerges that with respect to problems related with a colony and its land organization, there was a procedure not to put to the vote again what had already been established by the community. The procedure provided for a preliminary quorum that granted a sort of immunity to the proposer of any change, who only thus would be protected from atimia. The evidence becomes copious and more useful for our purpose in Athens. The first epigraphically surviving entrenchment clause from Athens comes from a local degree, voted for by the deme of Sipalettos. The text is inscribed on a marble stele or an altar, dated to between 470 and 460, around the same time as the second law from Naupactus that we have discussed. Even if the text is fragmentary, it is possible to read a provision that establishes that, in the text, is in the PPT, if someone puts to the vote the content or the payment, the lacuna, he shall pay 1,000 drachmas to the public treasury of the Sipaletians. The fine for an attempt to vote once more on the same topic was very high, making such a decision hard, if not impossible. The comparison between the law of Naupactus and Athenian procedures become even more unavoidable in the next source. This is the decree establishment, the dispatch of a colony in Brea. It is a very famous and studied decree, which offers us the first evidence of entrenchment clauses in Athenian polis decrees. The stele recording the decree was found broken in 3 fragments. The first 2 discovered near the Erecteion by Pittakis, and these are now kept at the Epigraphic Museum here in Athens. And the third was discovered in 1936 in the southeast corner of the Agora, but it's now lost. The inscription has usually been dated to between the 40s and the 30s. It's much debated its date, with a general agreement for the years around 446-5. The law is divided into 3 sections. The first establishes the organization for the dispatch of the colonists. In particular, the decree prescribes the selection of a board of officers appointed to help the lead autocrator of the expedition. His name was Damocles. The second section fixes the rights and the duties of the colonists. The entrenchment clause is written between the second and the last section, where some temporary provisions are decreed immediately after the arrangement for the publication of the decree. Thus, in the layout of the text, it tends the most important regulations voted for by the Assembly. The clause states, is in the PowerPoint, if anyone puts a motion to the vote contrary to the stele, or any speaker proposes or tries to issue a summons detracting from or annulling any of what has been decreed, he shall be, without rights, atimos, himself and the sons born from him, and his property shall be confiscated and a tithe given to the goddess, unless the colonists themselves make, we don't know, it's a lacuna, maybe a request. We are dealing with another decree about the dispatch of a new settlement. Like Naupactus. In this case, the funding of the colony was entrusted to a plenipotential leader. The entrenchment clause is very similar to that of Naupactus, punishing the proposer of a vote or of a debate with atynia, consequently making it impossible to renew a discussion. I would also like to stress the use of the expression "Liuein titon ephesephismenon" in the text of this decree, which resembles the wording of Nicias' speech when the strategos asked the officer of "Liuein tus nomus," but on this I'll come back later. In the following years, the use of the entrenchment clause began to occur more and more often. The next inscription referring to an entrenchment clause is the second so-called decree of Callias, probably voted for in 434-3 on the eve of the Peloponnesian War. Both decrees were written on opposite sides of the same stele. The second follows the first, which is devoted to the establishment of a treasury of the other gods in addition to the treasury of Athenia. Then, immediately after having organized the board of treasurers and their duties, Callias proposed a second decree, whose text was unfortunately damaged at its start by the later use of the stele. The Assembly decided how to spend part of the monies collected for the new treasury, perhaps decreeing supplementary work on the Acropolis. The decree is sealed with an entrenchment clause establishing that, so in the PowerPoint, the monies shall not be used for anything else unless the people vote for immunity, ten adeian, and when they vote about capital tax, peri esphora, as when they vote about capital tax, sorry. If anybody proposes or puts to the vote that the monies of Athena shall be used when immunity has not been voted for, let him be liable to the same penalties as when somebody proposes or puts to the vote that there shall be a capital tax, as for even if the wording of the clause is similar to that which has previously been analyzed here, there are some differences in the general framing of the decree. At first sight, it doesn't concern problems linked to the dispatch of citizens outside Attica or any problem in the field of foreign policy. The scope of the decree is financial. Moreover, the decree is much more accurate in defining the procedures of and the possible fine subsequent to the violation of the entrenchment clause. First of all, the Callias decree gives the possibility of avoiding the clause by using the adeia. This is the first extant attestation of this peculiar procedure of immunity. Adeia means without fear. This procedure was used a few years later in order to employ funds that came from the treasury of Athena for other public expenditures. Demosthenes refers to a law including this kind of procedure in his speech against Timocrates. The law forbade debating about Atimo or citizens indebted to the gods. The text is in the PowerPoint, unless immunity, tenadeian, is granted by not less than 6,000 citizens giving an affirmative vote by secret ballot, cubden psephizomenos. In that event, continues Demosthenes, it shall be lawful to put the question in such manner as the council and the assembly approve. Demosthenes is talking about 4th century laws and procedures, but a 6,000 quorum for a vote is well attested in 5th century practices for the ostracophoria. Moreover, the same number is consistent with the full panel of judges selected every year for the Eliaia. The number is so recurrent in Athenian and in general in Greek legal practices that Mogens Herman Hansen has hypothesized that the first phase of the PNIX, the early structure of the voting to hosting the assembly, was designed to make it easy to control a quorum of 6,000 voters. The decree of Callias establishes as a penalty the same one imposed on the proposal of an eisphora. Eisphora was a personal tax levied on Athenian citizens in case of need. It was clearly an extreme measure and one not mutually appreciated, whose careless proposal could lead to a fine or a punishment. We don't know what this penalty consisted of. An eisphora was actually decreed in 428, so we must suppose that in that case adeia was granted to the proposer and the levy of the tax was approved. It is significant that the eisphora of 428-7 was necessary to fund the extraordinary military expenses of those years. To sum up, Callias' decree made it possible to change the law, but at the same time established the regulation for doing so, using a peculiar procedure that required a quorum of 6,000 voters. Moreover, even if the decree concerns financial problems, the historical context and reference to the levy of eisphora make it clear that its measures were imposed out of fear for a coming war, and thus strongly linked to foreign policy problems. The last certain 5th century evidence comes from another important decree, that of Tudippos. This established the doubling of the total amount of the foros and was caused by the attempt to win the war against Sparta. It was, to put it another way, both a financial and a foreign policy measure at the same time. After having set the general proposal, the decree fixed the role and the duties of the officers in establishing the new tribute and its publication. At the end of this section, the entrenchment clause was inserted, saying that, PowerPoint, and if anyone else in any way prevents, eantis allos didoi psephon, the assessments at the time of the great Panathenaia in the prytany which holds office first, he shall be deprived of his rights, atimos esto, and his property shall be confiscated with a tithe for the goddess. Tudippos' decree confirms the field of use and the fine of the entrenchment clause that we have already outlined. It was an instrument employed in decrees concerning financial and foreign policies, aimed at making it impossible or barely possible to make any change to previous decrees, through the threat of athemia. Other, more epigraphically problematic sources go in the same direction. During the years of the Archidamian War, around 426, the Athenians strengthened their alliance with the town of Aphytis in Chalcidice. At the beginning of the extant fragment of the inscription referring to the alliance, the integration proposed by the IG editors hypothesized the presence of an entrenchment clause. But this is a slippery evidence, since the clause is totally reconstructed, as you can see, and thus the fine is as well. The same textual problems can be found in the entrenchment clause perhaps included in the coinage decree and in the Sicilian expedition decree. In the second case, we are at least certain of the date, 415. That of the first, on the other hand, is the subject to intense debate, even if in recent years there has been a growing consensus among scholars for a date during the Archidamian War. Besides taking into consideration date and textual problems, none of these decrees alters our knowledge regarding how the entrenchment clause worked. Now, we have to answer the question, what is the relation between entrenchment and me anapsepisein clause, if there's one? To begin with, we must scrutinize the sources usually referred to in regard to this clause, the second clause to the me anapsepisein. Both Dover and Harris recalled the Mytilene episode. Dover as a useful source for the legality of anapsephysis, while Harris argues that from a procedural point of view, the situation was very different from the Nicias episode. The debate and the vote on the same topic of the first day were actually held by those in power, to centele, says Thucydides in the chapter. That is to say, the Prytanes and the council as a whole. So, unlike the Nicias episode, the agenda was organized according to the conventional rules. What is a departure, nevertheless, is the unusual summoning of the assembly. Normally, an assembly was scheduled by the Prytanes 4 days before it was to take place. This was a common sense procedure, since communication of the summons and travel from the more remote parts of Attica to the city needed time. In the case of the Mytilene debate, participants were summoned during the night after the rally of the council, which usually took place after the meeting of an assembly. An obvious consequence was that many Athenians could not even know that a summons had been issued. Accordingly, what I believe skirted legality was not the agenda of the meeting, but its summons. However, if that is the case, we might easily ask, why did Cleon not make any reference in his speech to this infringement of law? The first possibility is that the conventional summoning procedure was not established by a law, but was only conventional. In other words, was a custom more than a law. The second possible answer, not necessarily in contradiction to the previous one, comes from an as yet inadequately studied source. A commentary on Lucian's Timon retells the episode in a different way from Thucydides. Here, Cleon is accused of having convinced the people to kill all the Mytileneans during the day, and during the following night, after being bribed, of having made the people disregard this advice. The way he will do this, says the source, was via an epistole, an order written by him. As I demonstrated, or try to demonstrate in a forthcoming paper, the anecdote probably comes from Theopompus, and although biased, is not totally without grounds. As Peter Rhodes has noted, Cleon was probably a member of the Boule of the Council in that year, in the year of the Mytilene episode, and took part in the decision to summon another meeting to debate the topic. He probably approved the decision for unknown reason, so that no one would bring up the exceptions to the unusual summoning and agenda of the assembly. Moreover, in the Mytilene episode, there is no reference to the verb anapsephizein or other cognate words. The word is attested only in the Nicias episode, in Thucydides, and in classical literature as a whole, is attested only twice. The other reference here is in Suda A 2141. The other reference comes from a fragment of a verse by the comic poet Pherecrates. It's the fragment 52, Castle Austin, coming from the Duo Didaskalos, as you can read in the PowerPoint. This comedy was staged, according to Castle and to other scholars, between the end of the 30s and the 20s, so in the period of the Archidamian War. We are in the same chronological frame of the previous decrees. The fragment has been transmitted without the context, as you can see, and it is impossible to understand the exact meaning of the word, but it probably meant to put to vote again, the same meaning as in Thucydides. The other remaining attestations come from historical and lexicographical works, are in the PowerPoint, from the imperial and the Byzantine times. What is interesting about sources like Cassius Dio, Zonaras, that we have here, and lexica like Suda or Photius, is that the word has a different meaning from Thucydides and maybe Pherecrates. In all these authors, the meaning is not to vote again, but to repeal or count the vote once more. So a different meaning from the classical sources. Thucydides is the only extant literary author that certainly uses the word with the meaning of vote again. The ancient historian probably borrowed this meaning from the bureaucratic style of official Athenian documents. The compound words with psephizo are usually used by Thucydides in passages taken from official documents or inspired by official documents. This is true for the chapter 224, where we find the verb epipsephizein in a context that reproduces the actual wording of the entrenchment clauses. As you can see, at the end, they prescribe that the death penalty for anyone who suggested or put to the vote a proposal to touch this reserve for any purpose, etc., is the same wording of the entrenchment clauses that we have read. And this use of Thucydides is true for the Sicilian assembly, where we find not only the verb anapsephizein, to anapsephizai, and the verb liuein with the object tus nomus, which resembles the actual wording of many decrees, but also read the expression ta epsephismena meliuein, which is once more the actual wording of the entrenchment clause in the Brea decree. Here is the wording of the Brea decree. The historical frame of the debate goes in the same direction. The topic of the assembly where Nicias made his proposal was the dispatch of an expedition under the command of two strategoi autocratores. We are dealing with a decision about foreign policy that involves considerable expenditure, a decision that is very similar to those for which the entrenchment clauses were created. So I think that in the first assembly on the Sicilian expedition, an entrenchment clause was added to the decree, saying to me anapsephizai ta epsephismena. And Nicias was trying to break this peculiar clause in this debate. Aside from Thucydides, the only extant classical sources attesting the word are epigraphic and confirm the situation outlined above. A greatly undervalued document is an inscription recording cult practices in the deme of Paiana. The description has been recently revised by different scholars, and its reading and understanding have been improved. What is of interest to us is the provision at lines 11-14. Here it states that it is impossible to vote again, me enai anapse fisai, on the previous statements unless there are 100 demesmen. Even if the description has been dated on epigraphical grounds to between 450 and 430, and thus we cannot establish the chronological relation with the other descriptions containing an entrenchment clause, it is of great interest that a me anapse fisai clause is linked to a quorum, the same procedure as the policy description with the entrenchment clause. The verb is attested in a decree voted for at Amphipolis against the opponents of Philip II in 357-6. But the verb here means to repeal or reverse the decree, a meaning that becomes the usual one in subsequent literary sources. So it's different, the meaning from the 5th century sources that we have read in Athens. It's the beginning of a new use of this verb. In 5th century documents, before the revolution of 411 and 404, the verb anapse fisai was used in the same context as the entrenchment clause, or hinted at similar procedures based on a quorum of voters to validate a decision. In police decrees, such as that debated before the dispatch of the Sicilian expedition, these kinds of clauses were used for decisions involving plenipotential commanders and significant expenditures for foreign politics. This picture fits well with the concerns of Athens during the Archidamian War and the following years of false peace with Sparta. As declared by Cleon in a speech, it was of great importance that decisions had been fixed for foreign policy at least, and to vote more than once in that area was risky for the state. In that period, the Athenians developed an increasingly precise procedure to give strength to the assembly decisions until they defined a procedure of me anapse fisai ta exefismena, involving a quorum and a grant of adeia in case of need. This was the last step before the evolution of the democratic system imposed by the dramatic events of the last years of war. Now, we go to the conclusions. Moving from the morphology to the syntax of Athenian democracy, to use Josiah Ober's brilliant metaphor, we should ask ourselves, why did the Athenians develop a procedure to limit the power of their main political body, that is, the assembly? The question becomes even more intriguing when we consider that this happened during the 30s and the 20s, the period dominated by demagogic leaders such as Cleon and Alcibiades. The first is also supposed to be the eminence grise behind some of the decrees where this clause was used, while the second, Alcibiades, was the opponent of Nicias in the debate taken by this paper as a starting point. It is actually the polarized context of those years that can help us to understand the grounds for the obsession for fixed laws underlying the procedure. If we read carefully the struggle among the powers of the assembly in the years of the Peloponnesian War, we note that limiting the sovereignty of the people rallied in the Pnyx was the target of the so-called radical Democrats, while in the episodes where this restriction was blamed, the proponents of a limitless assembly were the more conservative or even oligarchic sectors of the polis. This is what happened in the Mytilene episode, when Cleon asked for unmovable laws against a new deliberation on the same topic. And this is what happened during the meeting before the dispatch of the Sicilian expedition, when, against Alcibiades, Nicias encouraged the Prytanes to break the laws by putting a second vote on the agenda in regard to the already decided enterprise. The absolute sovereignty of the people against every attempt to limit it was theorized in the following years, once more by oligarchical leaders. On the eve of the anti-democratic coup in 4/11, the supporters of the plot put to the vote a decree to silence every kind of opposition. The motion says in the PowerPoint that any Athenian should have impunity to introduce any resolution he wished. But they also specified several penalties for anyone indicting the proposal for illegality or using other means to do him harm. It is curious that a meeting that was not limited established the beginning of oligarchical rule. The second episode took place after the Arginuse trial. The dry run of the 30 tyrants regime. Ptolemus tried to serve a summons against Calixenus, who had made an illegal proposal when he requested that all the generals be tried together, generals of the Arginuse battle, and not one by one, but the majority of the participants in the meeting. This is the phrase that David Lewis used at the beginning of his article about entrenchment clauses, cried out that it was monstrous if the people were to be prevented from doing whatever they wished. The trial was a step further toward the collapse of Athens and the establishment of a second oligarchy in the city's history. Even though these last episodes refer to the Graphe Paranomon, but maybe even to clauses as well, it is evident that subversive actors thought that a limitless assembly would be more easily manipulated. Accordingly, over the years, nations developed a number of summoning and voting procedures designed to hinder the attempts to overthrow democracy. In the years of war, they looked to the definition of procedures designed to give stability to foreign politics. They developed a clause with a well-defined field of application, foreign and financial decrees, premises the attribution of power to autocratic magistrates, exceptions, the vote of Adeia for the proposer, and fines, atimia, and other harsh punishments. Even the death penalty was used in this case. It is not unusual that politicians try to give more stability to foreign policy. This is something we can observe even in the foreign policy doctrine of many countries today. Governments may change, but their alliances and international strategies cannot. There was no such thing as a government in Athens, of course, but the importance of steady international policies in the context of war can hardly be underestimated. The democratic leaders began to do the same for other decrees, approving the Graphe Paranomon, but it was less developed when the conservative groups degenerated into oligarchical groups so that they could get rid of it. The bloody experience of the 30 tyrants forced people to think more carefully about the limits of the previous regime, reflections that led to the creation of a new kind of democracy, not ideologically different and rather than more moderate, better organized and more stable. At the beginning of his against Ctesiphon, Aeschines declared his hope that the Senate of 500 and the assemblies of the people will be properly conducted by those who preside over them, since all the standards and of orderly procedure had been set aside. He concluded the introduction to his speech by saying that if the laws are faithfully upheld for the state, democracy is preserved as well. In sum, in a direct democracy, procedures are the safeguard of the regime, and their absence leads to a state of exception, which is a prelude to oligarchical turns. So I'm finished, and that's all. Thank you.
So, thanks to Dr. Vittorio Saldutti for this precise, linear discussion and for this analysis that is a good dialogue between literary and epigraphic sources. And it's clear by these sources that these procedures are procedures put in place, adopted in times of emergency. Times of emergency. First of all, seeing the meaning that this verb, anapsephizein, has in other sources, as Cassiodione, Donara, Suda. So I have a consideration and a question, but I would want leave the floor to the audience first for any question, if there are.
Maybe we can break the ice with questions from the chat.
Ah, okay.
So
yes.
I read it loud, since you can hear it and everybody can hear it, but people on Zoom should be able to read it in the chat. So first question from Professor Ivan Maile. Are entrenchment clauses specific to democracies, or do we also find them in oligarchies? And also, he asked, as we said, this wonderful lecture clarifies a phenomenon that has not been sufficiently aware in my teaching and writings. Is this the material for future publication, and how does your view differ or align with other scholars?
The answer question, my question, okay, not at the end. Okay. So the last question, I hope to publish something about that. I don't know where, it's a work in progress at the moment, but yes, I hope that in the future I could publish this this paper. Yeah, differences between what I've said and the other scholars. The most important I've cited is Kenneth J. Dover, who thought that there was no anapsephysis, and also at the end, Edward Harris thought that there was no anapsephysis rule in Athens. I think that it was in developing procedure in the 20s. So this is the main difference between me and the other scholars that have interested on this topic. Entrenchment clauses are dozen in epigraphic texts, but later respect to what we have discussed today. So we have really dozens of entrenchment clauses in every kind of regime, oligarchical, democratic, republican, I say in the period of Hellenistic polis. But they are very different because they are attached, they are linked and inserted in decrees about every aspect of the polis life. So not only on foreign policy, sending of people and financial problems as in Athens in 5th century. So what is peculiar to Athens is that this procedure was limited and yes, developed for a special purpose. And it is different, I think, from what happened outside Athens later in the 4th, 3rd, and 2nd century BC. So yes, we have entrenchment clauses in oligarchical regimes, but after and with a different scope and task for this kind of clause.
Okay. Are there any questions online? Online, it's okay. In presence, are there any questions for the Dr. Saldutti? Okay, I break the ice with my questions and consideration in reality. It's interesting the fact that are the radical Democrats themselves to develop and implement these procedures that in some way limit the power of the assembly. That is a fundament of the democratic regime. It's clear, as I said, that these are procedures adopted in times of emergency. But are there any traces of these procedures even after the 5th century? Continuing to use them could have been convenient for the oligarchs, for example, or not. It's a procedures only in times of emergency in this year that you have said.
The manab sefise in clause, as is defined by those 4 points, is not used after the period we have debated, with just one exception in Athens, and this is the Aristotle's decree. This is the decree voted by the assembly in 3787, when was established the second league of Athens. And in that peculiar, very important decree, there is an entrenchment clause with similar contents like the entrenchment clauses of the 5th century. And it's interesting because it is a decree concerning foreign policy. Of course, is the birth of a new league with financial problems underlined, and yes, with the same fines. So it is in some way a continuation of this tradition of decreeing in the 4th century in a context which is very similar to the problems of a league, a political and military league, as in the 20s. Later, yes, as I answered before, there were many entrenchment clauses, but not designed like this. So even in the oligarchical regime, but not linked to the problems of, at the end, saving or defending the regime. So this is the answer.
Yes, the procedures continuing to exist, but in the context different, with the meaning different, with a different meaning. Yes, it's clear. Okay. One question. Okay, please. Come here.
Okay, my question is, did the entrenchment clauses punish only the proponent, or the Britainus who put the issue to the votes, or both?
Well, this is an interesting question because, yeah, I wrote a schema to better understand how it worked, the entrenchment clause, and in the wording of the entrenchment clause is clear that every time were both punished, the proposer and the president of the assembly, who put to the vote once again a discussion on the same topic. It is interesting because it is what happened in the Sicilian debate. So Nicias knew that he was responsible for a new vote, for breaking the previous entrenchment clause, but he was, for him, was very important to convince the Britannies, who was at the same time responsible for putting to the vote the same debate once again. So yes, in the entrenchment clause, the wording is very clear, and it punished both the proposer Tis Agorevi and also who didn't stop this proposal.
Anything question? Yes. Oh, fine.
Do we know many cases about the breaking of the rule of the Meana Psephysian clause, or they are very rare?
The only thing that we know is that Nicias tried to break the clause, but we have no sources saying anything about someone who has done this. So no.
Okay. Any questions here?
Do we know how to break it?
How?
Clause, like, is there a way of about breaking the infection clause, decree or something?
There were two ways to break an entrenchment clause. The first one was to vote an adeia, but it was a very slow way of breaking this law, because you have to think that one should propose a vote for adeia. They have to summon an assembly, vote the adeia, and then summon another assembly to debate once more on the same topic. So it was not easy. It was possible because, yes, this we know. During the Archidamian War, an S4A was voted and was voted with adeia. So we are certain that at least once an entrenchment clause was broken, because it was broken thanks to the adeia, but it was not something that could happen often in the debate. It was really a long procedure. The other question is, and we know once Nicias tried to break it, and when the oligarch broke the entrenchment clauses, proposing, but it was illegal to have an assembly without entrenchment clauses, without graphe paranomon clauses. So it was in a peculiar situation, in a very dangerous situation. In time of need, the assembly was held outside Athens. The people had fear of the coming of Spartans to Athens. So just in these peculiar episodes happened that entrenchment clauses and all the protection to democracy were broken by the Athenians.
Okay, so any question? No? Okay, okay. It's good news. So, okay, if there aren't other questions, so I would say that we can go to the garden for the refreshments. And thanks once again to the Dr. Vittorio Saldutti for his presence,
Questions,
for his discussion.
your kind welcome in the school.
And thanks all for your presence and
Next.
okay, I remember the next seminar, the next meeting seminar on the next is on 25 November, on Wednesday or Friday, on Friday, on Friday, Giulica Christakopoulos with the moderator Giorgia Di Lorenzo. And the next on December seminar on 15 December, okay, 15 December, Sofia Zumbaki with moderator Marcello Gelone. Okay, so thank you.